Welcome. This is the Service Design Network New York chapter. It's going to be a talk and discussion about applying service design within a financial institution. And so it's going to be really casual. I really want to hear from everyone. So think about what you might want to learn. Drop that in the chat, and I'll take a look at that as we get going, but feel free to share what you're hoping to learn from this evening. And I'll give just a brief introduction about the Service Design Network before we get going into the meat of the topic today. So what is the Service Design Network? It is a global organization with chapters just like this. There are 45 international chapters across the world, and the group helps to facilitate knowledge. It helps to create relevant content online. They have a ton of case studies that you can check out at the Service Design Network website. Recognize and celebrate best practices. They have awards. They have a conference that's coming up that we'll talk about in just a minute. It's really to raise awareness and grow service design as an industry, as a methodology. It's to connect this international community and enrich the local communities like this New York one, but I know there are folks from all over, and I appreciate those of you who are either brand new today, who are coming back, who used to remember us meeting in person, and just thanks for coming. So it's all these things, the Service Design Network, and we meet the second Tuesday of every month, pretty much consistently. So you can look for those events on Meetup. We'll make an announcement the week before we launch them online, and you can sign up just like you did today. So that, as far as we know, is not going to be changing. We're going to keep these online. We're primarily based in New York City, and so this is not a safe time to start meeting in groups yet. So when we can do that, we'll let you know, but we're staying online. Did you know we had a website? I'm super excited about the website, so excited I'm going to show it to you really briefly. Basically, that's going to be the place where we're storing a centralized, or that is a centralized place that we're going to store old event materials, and I'll give you an example of that. Basically, if you go to SDNYC.com, you can see we have a handful of sections about really how we want to talk about ourselves, how we want to explain our story, what we like to do in terms of organizing events, generating content through Medium or on social media, acting as mentors if you are interested in talking to any one of us. We're happy to just, share stories, experiences, and connect. So we also have this community section, which is what I want to make sure to highlight. This is where we have all of the event content from past events. You can load more, and it will continue to load all 35 of our past events. But if you look at one of them, so I'm just going to open one so you can see, it'll basically summarize what the event was, and then it will have a link to the Medium article as well as any output from that event. So I just want to make sure you guys saw that. I know we've talked about it maybe in a previous event, but I just want to make sure you knew that we had a space that we were storing things ongoing. Did you know we also won an award last year? So these are things that I just want to make sure if you had a second to take a look at our website. And you can reach out and talk to us if you'd like. So other than that, also please feel free to connect with us on social media. We have Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, we have our Medium and everything, but you can mention us. We try to keep it pretty consistent with the SDNYC. So feel free to also use tags SDNYC, SDN, NYC Design, all these things. So please, if you see something, you can screenshot it. This is the new world we live in, and share it on social media. And then just a few more housekeeping notes. We'd love if you could rate us online. We do look at the ratings later, and it just helps us gauge what is working, what you might want to see more of. And so please let us know what you think of this event. Couple more things. Kathleen is going to help me in the chat, but we wanted to make sure that you had your 20% off discount to the SDN Global Conference. It's going to be hosted October 22nd to 23rd. It's a 15 hours ongoing type of event since it's online and trying to reach all different time zones. So you can take a look at that on their website. And again, you get 20% off if you use this discount code that Kathleen can drop in the chat. So you can copy that and save that for later. And finally, if you would like to run an event, primarily, hopefully you want to be a speaker facilitator, please fill out the form that we're going to drop in chat. It's also in our Instagram bio. There's a list of links. And so if that helps you to remember after the event, you have an idea please put it there. And I said idea, but we're really looking for people to contribute as a speaker facilitator. Like if you submit something like, what is service design? If you want to talk about what is service design, that would be preferred instead of like asking us to do something, because we really want to bring in more speakers and give you a spotlight if you have something that you want to share with the community. So please fill out that form in the chat or in Instagram later. I'm going to do something, I'm going to stop sharing and just do a quick gallery view. This is my first time speaking to this community in this way. Usually I'm the host and I just do the housekeeping and then I hand it off to someone else. This is kind of a special moment for me. It's online, but still special. So if you feel comfortable, I'd love to invite you to turn on your camera for a quick photo that I will take as a screenshot. And you can wave if you would like. But yeah, just a little something that I'm excited to be here with you all this evening and to get to share a little bit about who I am. And so that's unique to other events that we've had. So if you want to turn on your camera and wave, I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3. So on 3, 1, 2, 3. And I got a screenshot. Thank you for I see a few more people. So actually we'll take another one. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for your patience. I'll go back to screen sharing and jumping into the content. All right, so why are we here? This is really a conversation about evolving how an organization is working. I saw some familiar Capital One faces actually when we did the screenshot, and I know there's some other folks who work for banks and other, I would say, like really complicated organizations. So I want to say this is a very slow progress over time. It's not something that happens overnight. And I did try to put a disclaimer in our event description that this isn't like it was so easy and it's done and you know we did it in 1 year. This is really a story about the things that we've done over time to start to practice service design within this organization. So for me, it's a little bit cathartic to share and to really reflect on a lot of the changes that we've seen in the way that we work primarily. So this isn't kind of a trying to make it a 1, 2, 3 steps to fix your organization and practice service design in a day. A little bit again about myself. As I mentioned, my name is Natalie Kuhn. I'm a senior manager of service design at Capital One within their commercial bank. So those are business to business products and services that we provide design for. And then, as I also said, I co-run the New York chapter of the Global Service Design Network. If you want to follow me, LinkedIn's probably best, but here's also Twitter, my name in LeadSpeak, and my website. So before this, I used to have fun. No, before this, I mean, I just described myself as really liking to try new things. This was actually from the global conference last year in Toronto with the Service Design Network. So here's the top of the CN Tower. Highly recommend, maybe not in a pandemic, or maybe they're still doing it with half as many people, who knows. So I mentioned this before, and I will take a quick peek at the chat to see what you've dropped in there. But there are a few things that I want to learn from you. I would love to learn a little bit about what you want to learn tonight. I'd also like to see who is in the audience. Do we have folks who are designers? Do we have folks who are in product, parts of a business, so maybe you're not even in, you know, some of those terms that I just used? Like, what is your role? And what is your comfort level with service design? So I'll pause there. I've done a lot of talking quickly, so I'll just check the chat and kind of take a look at what you guys are dropping in there. It's also a good way to connect with others and see who else is in here. So yeah, role, comfort level, and that could be like, I never heard of it. You know, I know a little bit, intermediate, I guess, like beginner, advanced. All right, so I can see product design, UX design, service design, a lot of designers. Thank you, faculty. So yeah, just taking, hey, and Laura. I appreciate that you love the talks. Great. So yeah, if you want to keep dropping them in there, I'm getting a good sense from this. Product management, got some more design. But yeah, feel free to keep sharing that and I'll check back. But that's just another way that folks can also get to know who else is on the call. I'll have plenty of time to ask questions and engage and see where you are within your organization. So I'll do a quick refresher just because there might be a couple people who are newer to service design. I don't want to leave them out. So just in a couple slides, really services are orchestrated systems delivered over time, providing value to customers and associates, so people working for the business and the business itself. So it's something that you might not be able to touch. Often people will say it's not something you can drop on your foot or even see all the elements, but there is evidence of it. Love the airport example, that's used pretty often, but you can see all the different points to address within service design. So the flight information, that has to be connected to the person, the support staff who's providing the information, the kiosks looking at the wayfinding, there's ticketing agents looking at all of these things coming together. It's really an orchestra of different touch points. And when I mention a touch point, that does make me think of product design. So that's something a lot of folks come from a product design background, or even arguably in a UX background, you might be designing for a specific touch point. Maybe it's a website, an application, or a couple of those working in tandem. And service design, the way that it's defined, and we can have a whole panel, and we have in the past, about what is service design in relationship to other forms of design. So that's a bigger discussion than we're going to have this evening. But service design, from the most basic way that I would describe it, is really all these things coming together. So looking at the app, looking at the website, looking at the kiosk, looking at the people working, what their process is like, looking at the front stage and backstage is something we'll talk a lot about, the things that you can see, the things that you can't see as you're interacting with a service. So yeah, that's how I would define it. And we can talk another time if you want to debate about service design in relationship to other forms of design. Happy to talk. So, and really, why service design? Why now? Our economy is dominated by services. When you look at what you interact with, when you look at Amazon, when you look at Airbnb, when you look at Lyft and Uber, these are all ongoing relationships that you have. And so we're competing for customer affection and loyalty like never before. It's not the same as it once was, maybe with a one-off purchase. It's these ongoing relationships that you develop over time, which makes service design more and more crucial. So basic service design ingredients. You may be familiar with all these. This is just another version. A lot of people may define them different ways, but for me, this is how I break down service design in my head, looking from research to realization, which is really the launch of a service or a process or some kind of set of products working together. So from the left to right, from a research perspective, that's making sure that you're actually doing research. Not all companies do research, shockingly. I've worked at them, and it's very difficult to do my job without that information. So I feel the pain if you're at an organization that doesn't do research. I know I also have some researchers on the call, so love research. But yeah, so really understanding how you can get a really comprehensive view of a current state of a scenario, in the sense of like what is happening today, and what are the pain points, and all about understanding what is now, and what do we use to understand or get inspiration for where we want to go. Sense making. It's really about that synthesis portion. So how do we use frameworks? How do we use mappings? How do we use different tools to make sense of what we've learned in the field? Co-creation, probably very familiar with workshops. We do a lot of workshops. Often mistaken for just a brainstorm. That's a whole conversation about design. What is design thinking versus what is an ideation? That's a whole other talk, I'm pretty sure. But there is a lot of strategic ideation in that. These can be very targeted sessions for different goals. So it's not always just coming up with ideas. It could be trying to align on prioritization. Maybe you have a ton of different things that you want to do, but you have to get different parts of the business that you work for to align to which ones are the most important to help the business be successful. That alluded into prioritization. This governance and prioritization, that's a big area. I come from, like I said, a financial institution. There's a lot of bureaucracy. So that's something that is sometimes overlooked, especially if you're coming from a smaller organization or an agency, something that maybe isn't as entrenched in a lot of the red tape and a lot of the process that is needed to get alignment and really figure out what does the business need to do next. And then this realization, which seems like a small part, but that can often be the most heavy lift of how do you take all of these things, bring them together, and actually launch something, actually make a change, whether it's something internally within your organization or something that is outward facing that folks experience. So, as I said very much earlier in the conversation, I want to make this discussion based. I will be checking the chat, and I'm going to check in just a moment. I want to hear your questions. I want you to also have some time to reflect and thinking about where am I in this journey? Maybe you're doing a little bit of all these things. Maybe you're missing one of these components, but just think about where are you in your organization. I'd love for you to keep that in your mind and think about your stories as I go through this. So like I said, I'm going to check the chat, see if there's anything in here to add. Let's see, just taking a look. We will come back to that. Okay. Where we started. So this is going back to my story within Capital One. For a little bit of context, I think when I speak to Capital One, I think a lot of folks think of the credit card consumer facing company, the flashy commercials and all that. And so that's not exactly where I work, but I want to acknowledge that is the consumer side of the bank. So I work for the group that's Experience Design. It's a horizontal design organization that supports the consumer bank with the commercials, but also the commercial bank, which I mentioned is business to business, and a lot of other groups that I could list, but it's not relevant for this conversation. It's mainly that I don't work for the consumer bank, and that's all I have to say about that. So within the commercial bank, I work for an organization called B2B. It's business to business. It's a strategic group. All you need to know is it's just within the commercial bank. And it just helps you see when I talk about the things that are happening within my part of the world, it's this piece within this piece. It's getting more and more specific. It's Capital One Commercial Bank and then B2B payments. So you also realize that to implement service design, you may be starting in a very, very specific arena and then trying to push that outward to other parts of the bank or organization. And so you may be starting with service designers or as I showed here, having designers across and trying to light up different parts of the organization to practice service design or strategic design. So just to note that I live in a very specific space, but we're always looking to expand service design outward. So back to the ingredients. I would argue, and if there's anyone that's in my group that's on this call, you can feel free to chime in. I would argue in 2017, back in January when I was hired, that we weren't doing any of these things in the pocket of Capital One that I worked within. Again, a pocket, this is not the larger organization. So this is where we started. This is where I started. And we had situations like this. Maybe you've seen this comic before, especially if you're a researcher, you might be familiar. Basically, it's a bunch of dudes trying to figure out what a teenage girl would like about a product. And the question is, why would we leave this room? Can we just like talk about it in here? And this person bringing up like, have you actually gone out and talked to the people that you're designing for? Seems pretty basic, but given the commercial bank and given the weight of some of these clients, when you look at the millions upwards dollars that they are paying us, to have somebody who is like me, some kind of researcher, designer, just ask them a bunch of questions was like, that seems really risky. So that was something that we tried to figure out in the beginning. I say we as a very small team, at the time 3 or 4 designers, and now we're at about 30 designers and counting. So it was a different time. Basically 3 years later, 2020, I'd say we're like really doing great with research, sense making, co-creation. Our prioritization and our ability to actually realize some of the change that we want to make is still a little bit hindered, and I can get into what that means. But basically, like I warned in the disclaimer in the event, we started here, 3 years, we are here. So we're not finished by any means, but I just wanted to add some reality to this conversation. And the feedback we've gotten, this was last summer, was that this is a really intuitive way of working. Surprised that in some parts of the bank, we still aren't working this way. So thinking about the research, to the making sense of the research, to the co-creation, to how about we align some of our priorities, which we're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. But why don't we do that? That seems very obvious, but we're still figuring that out. So again, it's because we didn't work like that before. So if we had started working with those different ingredients of service design, if that was how we were all brought into the organization to work together, fine. But that wasn't how the commercial bank started. And so that's just something to note, is that if you don't start from that position, which most organizations don't, it's just going to take time to change mindsets and change the way that people are working, and to ask them to do more work. Because service design is breaking down silos between groups. It's a lot more work to bring more people together, to ask more people questions, to work more holistically, is more of a challenge than if you were to just design in a silo. So in doing that, it is much easier to just stay the same. So these are the 5 sections that I'll go through, and I'll try to pause throughout each section just to hear your thoughts. I want to do a breakout room. We've done them at our past events. I have a lot of material to go through, and I love for you guys to all get to talk. So we'll see. I guess just be ready for maybe a breakout room at some point with 4 to 5 other folks to reflect on this and see what resonates with you, maybe what's different. Maybe you have a 6th ingredient that I didn't even think of. So just as we're going, think about that. What questions do you have that you can ask either in the chat or aloud, and what you might want to discuss with other folks? So I'll just check if there's anything else. When I check, it's a nice moment for you to take a deep breath and just process your day. I am going to answer some of these. So going back, these are some great questions. Thank you. How do you interact with product managers and the business decision makers? I'm going to go into that a little bit toward actually the prioritization and realization components. So I'll come back to that. Would love to know how agencies or consultants can collaborate. I remember I worked for FJORD before this, and we had some projects with Capital One, with JP Morgan. And for that, it's really making sure you know exactly who you're talking to and where they sit within the organization. So I would say that's probably the most important part. If you're talking to someone in a certain pocket of the bank that is just paying you to give them an idea that they're going to put on a shelf potentially for a while, it's getting to know the stakeholders really well and figuring out like where do they have leverage, and being realistic about maybe it is something that we give them that they come back to later on, and we're okay with that. So I'd say for that question, you just need to figure out who you're speaking with. Cutting across silos within this context, various stakeholders, different comfort level with design. I get this is always a challenge. I'd say being really open to putting yourself on the spot and really explaining what you do, and being patient with people and explaining different terms. Cutting across silos, you just got to get different folks in the room that are going to commit. We just did it's a 2-day, it feels like it's already been 2 days, it's been 1 day, working session with folks across different parts of the bank, and to just be open to explaining the value, knowing that you're not going to get it right at first. If you try to break down silos, you're going to stumble a little bit. So I'd say just try to explain to people what you're trying to do, and then mostly do it, like actually do the workshop, get people to dedicate a short amount of time. Maybe you start with an hour session, see what you can get done in that hour, and people will start to see the value. So start small is maybe a good synopsis of that. Start small, get a few allies, advocates for what you're trying to do, and grow from there. Within Capital One, different comfort level with design, that happens all the time. And I would say just don't make anyone feel stupid. Obviously you wouldn't do that, but just help teach them the different elements. Can you guys see well, I won't ask if you, I don't know if you can see the chat covering up the sharing. I don't think so. And I know I'm taking a long pause. You guys have great questions. I do want it to be casual, so that's why I'm pausing. Was somebody going to speak?
Natalie, I was going to say, I have those questions put it on the side, so it's up to you if you want to answer them all together or you want to take them right now.
I answered a few. I'll come back to the rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll get into the content, but I really am liking the questions. Feel free to keep sharing them. And Kathleen, thank you. Will help keep me honest about which ones I answered. So the very first pillar is research. So shifting this paradigm from it is scary for a stranger to go talk to my clients. I've worked very hard to cultivate that relationship, and I'm scared of you going in there and asking them something that makes them realize they don't even like our products and leave the bank, which is kind of an extreme, that's a pretty slippery slope. But I'd say, and that's a generalization, I don't know that that's verbatim how folks felt, but we wanted to shift that paradigm of creating products and services within a vacuum, which was comfortable and safe. So we stood up a research process. We now have a research team. We now consistently talk directly to our clients. With the exception of a pandemic, things are a little bit tense for everyone in the world. So yeah, but we now have a process. We now have a dedicated team. We now we have a group that works with us. And this is how it started. From my perspective, I blurred out some of it. You'll notice that a lot throughout, just so I'm not oversharing. I started with a clipboard with some Word documents printed out. It was a research guide. It was an email from past interactions with the client. It was some pens. And I made all my partners carry this clipboard. And I got teased a little bit. They're like, a clipboard, a worksheet. Can't we just talk to them? But it was starting to develop a process. It was like, no, we can't just talk to them. We need to have a way that we talk to them. We need to follow research protocols. We need to, of course, we don't want to be rigid and stiff and make folks uncomfortable if you're researchers out there, but we had to have some kind of way that we could document what we were hearing and start to set up a process. So really my learning from this is just create something that you can start to show process, iterate on it. I think if Jen is online, I don't know if Jen's here, but she saw me come up with like 3 or 4 different clipboards initially, and then that turned into a more rigorous process over time. So it was kind of like very, very lo-fi to start. And now we have a dedicated experience insights team that acts within our organization that we partner with. It's changed. And to take lots of pictures, you'll notice I also have blurred out as much of this as I could, but just making sure that if you're starting up this research practice, you can bring back to the teams what you saw. Because seeing this, folks were like, why do they have so many, it brought more questions and made them realize the value of going and talking directly to our customers. There was so much more that folks were able to learn, and these pictures helped make a case for why we needed to keep doing it. So it's like building up all of these different pieces that show value. And that kind of goes back to the question of if people don't know design or they don't know what service design, like show them. Like to just do a presentation is one thing, but to really like document, to start a process. So yeah, I just had to document the process, take pictures, bring it back. This is probably overwhelming to folks who don't use Postits, especially who doesn't use Postits now. But in this pandemic time, and there are other ways that you can do this. I'd say there's Mural, Murio, a lot of digital tools that you can use, Google Sheets, Excel, to make sense of your research. I know there are a lot of, again, researchers on the call that might do this differently, but I did this to show what we learned in the field. This was something that stood up in a space by my desk, and people were like, what the heck is this? And they would read some of the quotes, they would read some of the themes, they would be like, you learned this from 4 clients, you only talked to 4 clients, and this is what you got from it. So it was just another way to show the research and show it off. I'll skim through a couple. Here, I did do a lot of, you can't see the presentation because I can't show you it, but basically, I talked about it a lot too. I had the opportunity to share with, these were stakeholders, these were actually sales relationship managers, folks that were maybe more hesitant about us going and talking to their clients. I shared, how do you take the research and turn it into actionable things that you can do? And that for a lot of people was really what changed minds. Is I didn't just go to talk to them to make some Post-it wall and take a bunch of pictures. I used that to then figure out what we were going to do next in our process and to really create products and services that reflected what the client's needs were. It seems, again, kind of like duh, but to do that presentation and to walk people through, to bring them along in the journey was really, really crucial. So the piece of this is really to roadshow it. any opportunity that you can to share the work that you're doing, make it really accessible, answer the questions. There was a difficult comment that somebody gave me once, and it was, I'll come back to it, but it's like, answer the difficult questions, like explain to them what you're doing. So create visibility. And this was all about research. So to kind of recap, we now have a centralized research team. That's really great. We have embedded research managers. We have a more holistic research strategy. None of this existed again in 2017. This is all as of today. Refine processes that we're still iterating, share out sessions. So now we do the roadshow as a team. Many people are doing research, so we share that all as a group. So I'll pause here and I'll just see so many pauses. Is this anything like, I guess I'll just ask this question. Is anybody else in this similar situation? Are you trying to get up a research process going, or anybody else want to share? Jen's here and she does remember. Great. And yeah, the question about a research repository, we are working on a centralized digital space. For that, you really have to indicate to people what they'll get out of contributing to it. That's a whole other conversation. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, very similar challenge. Opposed, yeah. Yeah, so I think, again, like making the point of what research can lead you to, how it can help you make a business decision or avoid a bad business decision. These are all things that we did. Yeah, yeah, some companies, I'm just reading the 2017 from Kristen, that's where her company is. So yeah, so anyway, keeping on with that. So I'll keep going through, and then maybe we'll get to a breakout room. Maybe I'll just keep threatening that. All right, so sense making. So I'll go through really quickly. Again, each one of these could be a short segment on how to use some of these frameworks. But so this is kind of to me, this is like the middle of the road step to using the research to take action, and using that research to actually create change and make decisions that will help you design for a service design experience, really. So what do you do with this research? Like, you've gotten all this stuff, like how do we include people? How do we help make sense of it? Here's some more pictures of Postits. Again, you don't have to use Postits. That's just one of the ways to get people involved. I like this picture because it was actually 3 different disciplines together. The folks on the right were developers, the folks on the left were designers, and the laptop I'm holding is actually our product owner. So this was a conversation that was pretty ad hoc about research that we found in the field, and we were having a discussion. I actually asked these 2 developers if they'd ever been part of a research synthesis session, and they never had, and they both, I mean, not to judge by looking how many years they've been working, but they had decent years of experience, and they'd never been part of a research session where they could actually hear what had clients directly said that would then indicate things that they would begin to build. So that was interesting to me, and maybe you've seen that, maybe you haven't, but then they became advocates for wanting to do this. And then it was more about, well, why would I build something without having this? Why would I want to be involved without knowing what the client said about what they need? So, and then, yeah, just the more people that you can involve, and even if they've never done it before, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that together. So it was started small with smaller groups like this, and then imagine if it was more of like a 20-person room and going through these insights, which I'll actually show that in a little bit. I've also taught a lot of classes. This isn't a requirement, but if there are ways that you can, I would say, test yourself in different scenarios. I think there are actually a couple people on the call where they were either in one of the classes that I taught or helped to bring me to the people that they were trying to teach about service design. And so this was a big deal, was also, you do have the opportunity to teach, and that is something, if they can learn how to apply it to their specific scenario, and it can also give you more use cases or more understanding of how you can learn to apply service design in different parts of the bank. So this was something that I did within my part of the organization and teaching people how they could apply it to their different pockets. It was also outside of my organization, which was, again, trying to spread this mindset of service design across the org. So teach them, take the lead, coach them. learning by doing is a great way to start. So that's something they need to be able to apply it to something real. If you're, I mean, we often will use an airline example or a restaurant example of how to apply service design, but that only goes so far. And you really need to help them see how to use service design, how that can be applied to what they do, because it's easy to see another scenario and kind of be like, well, that's not me. I'm not going to be able to use that. So helping them create mappings for their specific area and how do you use the map? That's the other thing is the map isn't just to be made to look nice. It's something to help prioritize what to do next. So looking often at the peaks and the valleys, what does that indicate about your opportunities? Maybe you're trying to flatten out the valleys and you're trying to look for like these 3 areas are connected. If we solved this particular thing, it would impact all 3 areas and that would be a huge win. So what is the map? How do we get inputs for the map? You can't just like make up in your head. That goes back to the research section. You take the research, you put it into a map. And then how do you use that map to move you forward? So experience map is more client or customer facing, I should say, more about the experience that they're having with a product or a service. And then a service blueprint is a little bit more about the process, the people, and the technology. So it's taking a slice of what is happening. We talk about this front stage. So what is the customer, the client, the person experiencing the service? What about the people that are serving them or helping them? What about the people behind the scenes, like a person like me who's designing for things, or maybe somebody who's helping to fix something that's broken? What are they doing? What are the systems they're using? What are the processes? And so that's another way to look for opportunities. But all of this is not just to make a map and then put it off to the side. It's all to look at how can we strategically approach our problem in a way that we wouldn't have if we didn't do research and if we didn't create this kind of mapping. So that's really the theme throughout this is if we had not done this, we wouldn't have seen these gaps here. We wouldn't have seen like some, and again, if you do this often, it seems kind of second nature, but a lot of folks have never seen their process this way. I created a Google sheet the other week and it was a blueprint essentially, and a team had never seen their process that way. They'd seen process maps that are more the flow charts, but it just, you know, don't be afraid to try things out and use really, you know, use the examples that your teams have to yeah, it's using the tools without saying any more words about that. To the left, here's another large mapping that I created to help prioritize what we were going to do next. Some groups working through something on the right. But yeah, make sure you refine along the way. These are living documents. Even if they're on paper, they can still be living documents. Yeah, keep working with them. Start out rough and then you can refine them as much as you need to, but make a map. Use the research and make a map. Here's some designers talking about something. I think, again, I've said this before, drawing that line between research, making sense, and designing for the products and services. We're not just doing this for the heck of it, is all to help us make a strategic decision. And the more that you can ground it in that, the better. And that was all I had on sense making. So now, well, what's an office? This was a little bit my reflection from when we were in the office. So the office is now lonely, but it is covered in Post-its and maps. Each team, to some extent, has their own space to work through this. There are a ton of trainings and little things that people can do to educate themselves. The research team is actually teaching some of those as well. Their folks are regularly sharing these mappings. People are drawing connections, and we're now more so addressing human needs. And really people are asking questions like, even if they don't quite know what a blueprint is, they're like, well, shouldn't we make a blueprint? And then we always have to ask, well, what do you think a blueprint is? And you know that it's going to be, we need to do this work. We can't just make it. You have to go and do work before making it. But we're getting a lot of great questions around like, well, shouldn't we try this thing? So people have gotten word about what are these different service design tools? What is research? And maybe I should try to do that too. So maybe you can help me do that. So I'll pause again. So I know I'm speaking quickly too. So I want to make sure more. So B2B versus B2C. My talk is mostly B2B for right now. I'm gonna come back to that one, but I like your questions, all of them. Let's let's see, I'm just looking back up. This is, again, your Zen moment of the day to maybe stare at a wall quietly. So a journey experience map template or create a new map. I get this question actually a lot, like what is the journey map template? And not to put down that question, but to me, it depends on the context of what are you trying to do with it? Are you trying to depict the client experience for the purpose of highlighting their biggest pain points? And then you're going to, is it, I'm trying to think of like with the service blueprint, is it looking at underlying processes on the backstage that are influencing the front stage? Like, what are you trying to do? And then I would think about what are the X and Y axes. I mean, usually it's time left to right. Like that's a pretty key consistent thing, but I don't necessarily use, I'll share some links at the very end that there's some books. Adaptive Path had some templates. There's Service Design Doing. I used to have them behind me. This is Service Design Doing. These are service design methods, and they have some great templates that you could use, but I often tweak them. I don't feel like beholden to these templates. I tweak them based on what I need. Differ from, so I'll come back to B2C, creating service blueprints. Does anybody want to speak out loud if they have a question so far or anything to note? Like maybe you have a similar story?
Yeah, Natalie, I just wanted to clarify I just wanted to clarify my B2B/B2C question. I think it's more that I'm used to seeing maps and blueprints laid out from the standpoint of a B2C project. And in working on a B2B project as I am right now, I was wondering how you shift, or maybe it's not as big a shift as I think, but how you shift the tool to accommodate the B2B needs as opposed to B2C. And feel free to address that later, but I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you for clarifying. That is helpful, actually. So the way that we talk about B2B and commercial, the people that we're serving are still individuals, like they're still consumers of a product or service. So I still will put like the consumer of whatever it is at the top, and then I'll put the front-facing associates or staff or whatever you want to say, the backstage. So I feel like you could even just call it your audience instead of like consumer or business. You could just call it the end audience or end user, like the end person who is experiencing the service. You could even, if it is, well, I'm taking it further about like internal organizations, it could be like a partner group that you work with. So sales, like for us, it could be like we're trying to help the sales team better have information about our newest products. And this is how it's working right now. So I'm on one side and then sales is the top swim lane. So I just see it as, and I can talk about that more at the end as well, or when we get to another part, but I just see it as like your audience, and it's regardless of whether it's consumer or business, because with the business, it will be individual roles that you're helping. If you're looking at it as just like a business, that's interesting because I would be curious, like, how do you break down the actions of the business? Like, I think you'd still need, like for us, we have a decision maker, and then we have a person that is actually using a lot of our products. So we break it down into those areas to be more, but I can talk more about that. Everyone knowing what yes. Okay, so Michelle, this is good because this is a great segue to my next sections. But yeah, we've gotten through, like, people are on board with the research, they're on board with the synthesis. Now what do you do with it, and how do we agree on what's most important? That's one of the bigger issues that we have right now where I work, is what is most important for all of us to focus our, I hate calling people resources, but that's, I guess, how we speak sometimes, but what do we focus the people that are doing the work on to make improvements? Financial regulations. This one I do want to come back to. I bring in subject matter experts, and they know more about the financial regulation than I do. I know more about the process, the facilitation, in the sense of how to bring folks together to create and make sense of things, but I will bring in subject matter experts when it comes to regulation. And we'll keep moving. All right, so now co-creation. This is workshops. So I'm a big planner. The sum of this is really make a plan, have a plan, but also be prepared to completely disregard the plan based on what's happening in the room. So as much as I am a planner, I'm also completely comfortable, and I have some pictures toward the end of where we abandoned the agenda entirely. And I spent the whole time taking, like, they weren't quite sketch notes, but I was just writing all over the walls, and that was what we needed in the time. So I'm all about, this is a group we planned a week before. We had these in-person, huge, like, who remembers in person, but these huge boards with different gestural concepts that we were showing to different stakeholders. And so there was a lot of planning of who do we invite, who's going to be facilitating, how we're going to capture feedback and notes, how are we going to print these huge things and bring them into this space. So there was a lot to consider. And so my sum of this is really like, a couple weeks before, like, make sure you're inviting the right people, make sure you know exactly what you want to have come out of this. And many of you may know this. I've seen other partner groups, even other designers, where it's like, all you need is the right people in the room. I don't agree with that. I think that that's like one of the components, but you also need to have things for those people in the room to do and have them thoughtful in a way that they can see the value in that time. This goes against, or it goes for continuing to prove the value of service design and why you need to be doing these things. So if you get people in a room and you waste their time once, they're not going to want to ever come again. Workshop fatigue, just as Zoom fatigue, is a real thing. And you don't want people to feel like, another one of these, are you kidding me? So you don't want that. You want to avoid it. You want to have appear organized. That also builds trust immediately. Often we'll put notes on the walls, and again, you can do this digitally as well. Like, what are the guardrails? What are the guidelines? Like, how are we organizing and engaging today? More in-person things. But yeah, so, and the way I usually organize the workshops is looking at high level, getting really specific, and then allowing people individual commentary as well as group conversation together. So they have that time to process as an individual. Not everyone is a person who feels comfortable talking to 30 other people or even talking aloud to 4 other people. They might want some heads down time. So I think I get into that in a little bit later. And then I learned something from this. I'm actually against having timers up. I go by loosely how much time I ask people to spend on different things. And then depending on what they're doing, I might cut it short or let it go longer. So that's a small thing from workshops, is I don't use a timer that everyone can see anymore. And that's actually really changed my ability to work with the room, whether it's digital or in person. So that's a tidbit that I would recommend. Having a facilitator, and now in Zoom ways, like having a facilitator and then a producer role, who's the person that's helping manage the breakout rooms, manage the polls, manage the, you should probably have even a separate note taker. I think you need more roles now that we have Zoom as kind of a connector between us. But make sure that you know who is doing what throughout the day. And this is an example of a workshop done a while ago, and we even had a photographer. There was even a dedicated role for taking some pictures of everything, not just for fun and for decks like this, but also to document as we went along what each of the phases of work they were doing, what that started to look like. So again, all of this is around planning, making sure you have the right space. Do you have the right supplies? I'm going to go through the rest of these pretty quickly, because I think the bottom line really, and also we can't do a lot of these in-person sessions. So consider, I'm happy to talk about Zoom and how we can facilitate. We can still have workshops over Zoom. They're just a little bit different. But a lot of this is just, you got to do stuff. You got to plan it. And you got to be prepared to drop all the plans, and you need full participation. That's something that's pretty uncomfortable to ask for. I would say that's something that I've tried to grow in as a facilitator, is if you're asking for a certain amount of time, make sure that it's the appropriate amount of time. Maybe it's an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. It depends on what you need. But I would make sure that you respect your own time and you respect their time. And so having people coming in and out to try to get them to not do that. That's been a big area of growth for myself, is to say, you know, I ask for your engagement, tell them, of course, ahead of time, you know, like give them plenty of warning to clear their calendar. But the more participation that you have, the more they'll see what you're trying to do, and the more effective that it can be. So, and it also goes to show, like, you put a lot into this and you want them to also engage. So that's one of the kind of like cringeworthy moments, is when you're like, I need you to not be taking 3 or 4 calls throughout this 2 hours. I'd like you to just focus on this. So that's difficult, but please do it. Other things, I mentioned this already, making sure that individuals have time to think on their own, as this person is coming up with their own thoughts before having to be put on the spot and share with other people. There are a lot of different, here are just some pictures of different ways that you can workshop different activities. And again, a lot of this is, it's too bad to look at. We can't do this anymore. It's all in Zoom. But at the end of this co-creation, so now we have a lot more people aren't trying to plan a workshop last minute unless they have to. And they're all understanding of like, let's get the right people. Let's make sure we think really critically about the activities that we're going to do together. It's not just show up and do whatever. There are hackathons. That's something that I think people show up and they're given a loose prompt, and correct me if I'm wrong about hackathons. There are some types of things that you can do where people show up and like make, but with things that you're trying to do at work, I would say that the thoughtfulness around the planning is make or break you being able to continue these type of activities and to continue to show how the research comes together with the mapping, and the frameworks comes together with what do we do with it. Like this workshop part to me is like, what do we do with what we've created? How do we move this into action that teams can really get on board with? It feels a lot, I hate this term, but I'm going to use it. It's a lot less of like this navel gazing. And it's like, okay, we took the research, we made it into something we can all understand and see. Now we're getting in a workshop. We're going to talk about prioritization, which is the next one, but we're going to talk about what are we going to do? What are the action items? It's the doing that's happening next. How do you do a workshop? I'm going to do checking the chat. Feel free again if you want to take yourself off mute and make a comment. Let's see. UX team of 1. I've been there. I've been a team of 1. I think it was 1 designer to 100 people, and that was a stressful time in my life. Yeah, planning for improv is huge. Just don't be too precious about your agenda. Like, make the agenda and think about the agenda and know, but be ready to move stuff around. 1-person team, what control, let's see. So I want to come back, Clara, to there's a lot of control over a second opinion. I'm just reading your comment. Do you want to clarify that a little bit? A special or better approach to arrive at a valid decision making for the next step, like a self checklist. Like, I'm reading that as like a pre-work, but do you mind clarifying your question so I can see if I can answer it?
So I was curious if it was different, if it was a 1-person team versus working as a collaborative group to trying to come out to a resolution. Because I saw in some of your slides, you're working with your developers, and collaborating with them, you gain like a valuable insight that you may not have caught when you're working by yourself. So if you have any advice on that.
Sure. So are you saying you're in a situation where you have to work by yourself, or you're trying to?
Yes. So I have to work by myself. It's a small company, and I guess it's non-disclosure work, so I can't exactly ask around for opinions.
I see. That's a tough situation. So you can't ask people in the company even about, like, I was going to say, if it's just you, couldn't you still like one-off, have kind of like one-off workshops where maybe it's like a shorter session and you're getting the input of 1 person at a time maybe, or getting some of them together. So you can't do that internally either?
Right. There's literally like an office clerk, like a secretary person, and my boss and myself. So it's like super small team. He's trying to find like outsource for a developer. So it's kind of like starting out stage.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And then is the tool for someone that is, like, I would say, I guess, and I'll kind of give, I'll try to answer it, and then let's come back to it in a little bit. I will make some time at the end to see if I didn't answer questions to get through some more. But I'd wonder if you could get some kind of like blind testing. Like, we actually use proxies where it's not our direct client, but it's someone who is like our client. Or if you could even do something in the street where you don't say who you work for, you don't give details of the product, but you could somehow test the idea without giving too much away. Like, I guess I'm wondering, like, how could you, and if there are actually researchers on this call too, so maybe let's come back to that. I feel like I didn't fully answer it, so I'll come back and see if we can answer it. So keep that in mind. And if Kathleen or anyone else who's watching these, I want to make sure I can come back to these. Okay, Brad had a response. So you can read Brad's response while I go through a few more slides. And thank you for your questions. All right, so the last two that I'll go through for today are the areas that admittedly we have not conquered. And all of these I would have conquered is the wrong, I don't even like that term. Let's never use that again. I would say these are the areas that we've been successful in, but can continue to iterate between research, sense making, and co-creation. And then prioritization and realization, I would just say we're a little bit shaky in, and I'll explain why. So this is our next frontier. So focusing on the right things. For us, we really know what we want as a larger organization, but we struggle, or we have like a vision of what we want. And then when it comes to the individual teams and how we're going to get there, we can stumble a little bit, or we have these different teams that are trying to solve problems that don't always align up to this bigger vision. And you may see that if you work in a larger organization. But basically we haven't figured out how to take all the really smart people that we have and focus them on one thing and just stay focused on that and finish it. We kind of like try to do a lot of things, and then we're not always successful. More Post-its, who's surprised? So one of the areas, and I think there was a question earlier a little bit about like, how do you work with the business, or how do you work with partners, or how do you get prioritization and a better alignment so everyone can work toward that. But making sure you have the appropriate level of leadership in the conversations around priorities. So often we don't have the impact that we want because we don't have the right decision makers, or missing an entire discipline, which is a major issue, causing some sessions that could be repetitive. So this kind of goes back to the workshop planning, but making sure once you start talking about, okay, these are the priorities, this is what we think we're going to do, again, going back to from the research, from the sense making, from the workshops that we've done, we've come to a consensus to some extent of what we need to do. And so you need to make sure that you're bringing that to the appropriate people. And this goes back even way back when somebody asked about being an agency and working with a financial institution. You need to know your org chart, and you need to know who sits where, who reports to who. How can you get familiar with what are their goals, like what are they trying to achieve, and how can you speak to that? How can you try to explain to them the value of solving some of these problems as a team, how it will impact their team, how as a leader this can help them achieve what they want to do as well. So it's really going through and working with, again, with managers of yourself or with other stakeholders, and getting to know who is who and who do I need to actually make this happen. Because if you do all this research and all of these things and all these workshops, and then you never really engaged with the person who's ultimately going to make the decision about whether this goes forward, it's not going to go forward. So make sure you're talking to the right people the whole time. Here's a fun picture of, again, when we used to be in offices and eat food together. How crazy is that? But this was a working session with a lot of our leadership in the area of the bank that we were coming up with solutions for. So it's not a glamorous picture. It's not meant to be a glamorous picture. It's just a humble picture of some people in charge of the business figuring out what they're going to do about some issues that they came across. And really, this is something newer that our groups have started to discuss, is dropping our egos. We've done a lot of these, we call them Spark trainings or learning as leadership trainings, where we've started to really chip away at our egos and trying to solve things out of what we as individuals want to achieve. And that might sound maybe a little touchy-feely, I guess is what some people might say, but I would say that it has changed the way that we work. And that's something that I don't know how you can do that if the culture isn't already open to it and already doing trainings and already interested in having leaders be a little bit more Ego-Free Leadership is a book. You should look it up. But we've been pretty good about starting to have real honest conversations, and for people to say, you know, I'm failing here, or my team is failing, or I'm struggling, I need your team's help, or there's no way we can do this by the deadline. So having these real conversations, and especially if you can create that kind of environment at a leadership level, and again, we're still working through this, and where you sit in the organization, you might be rolling your eyes, how am I supposed to help my leaders drop their egos? But if you can figure out ways that you can be straightforward and start being the person in the room within reason with what you feel comfortable with, but asking like, why? Or do you think we can really do that? Or, you know, I've seen us not do this well before. Maybe we could try a different approach. Like, there are ways that you can break the cycle of doing too many things, picking maybe the wrong priorities. That's a whole can of worms of how to start to break that down. But this was a conversation that we had where people were shockingly honest. And it started with one person in the room who said, you know, I don't want to have this working session be like the other working sessions we've had where we're not honest about where we are now and where we need to be. So this was similarly a session where the agenda completely, this is, I guess, what I do under stress. I just write all over the wall. But what happened was we had a session planned, and we ended up saying, you know, that's not right for where we are right now. Let's just talk. And so what I did as best as I could was to take notes and follow the conversation and circle and highlight, like, okay, so this is what we said. Great. So this is what we're coming out with. And we had a list at the end, which it was, again, this is something we can't do right now. We can do it in Zoom and figure that out. But basically, this is going back to that, like, just do whatever your team needs to do in that moment to move it forward. It doesn't have to be like a polished, like, we checked all the boxes and did my agenda. This is what we needed for the team. So make time to have these important conversations. You can't brush through prioritization, and you just need to slow down and be patient. I guess this whole deck is a lesson in patience, but really give people the space to think and talk through the barriers for change, brainstorm, align on next steps. But yeah, going through this prioritization phase, it's like a very, to me, and from where I sit, my vantage point within the bank, it is a touchy subject. There are still a lot of egos. There are still a lot of things that people want to achieve for, whether it's their promotions or whatever is driving them. But if you can try to figure out how to drop all of that the best you can, I'm just like, we're still figuring it out, so working on it. But make sure you spend time on this and clear schedules. And this was a session that was supposed to be 2 hours. The leadership team canceled the next 2 hours of calls that they had, just canceled everything. And then they even canceled a meeting the following week, an all-day session. So but you need people to be committed, and that's a whole equation to figure out how you can get folks to commit to that type of change and clearing schedules and really want to do things differently. A couple very tactical ways to help people prioritize is just force ranking and making it clear, like, if we do this, we cannot do this. Not the, if we do this, maybe we could do that other thing. You have to be really specific and say, we cannot agree to these two things. You've got to pick one. Nobody wants to have that conversation, but you have to have it to make sure that people are focused on the right thing. If they know that other thing is not going to happen because they chose this more important priority, that changes the way they approach the conversation. And once you agree, go with it unless something major changes within the business. For us, we're always managing risks, so we could have some surprise and then we have to reshuffle things. But I would really love to see us and other organizations pick something and just follow through and do it and not get distracted. And getting close to the end. So the next steps and what everyone's going to do are really crucial, like scoping. So we've prioritized these things, like what do we need to commit to, who's doing what. That can be a whole other work session in itself. So creating a project brief or some kind of like, this is the problem, this is what we need. Do we need to rearrange who's aligned to what? Do we need to maybe do a reorg so that we can handle these really incredibly important priorities? So now we have some priorities. We are trying to look across the horizontals, break down silos. But again, we're still working through that follow through. We've done a few reorgs to actually make sure that we're aligned to the right priorities, the most strategic ones for where we are. We've been working through a framework for saying no, and we have a few frameworks. And when I say no, that means not committing to 10 things. It means committing to 1 to 2 and actually doing them. So that's something that we're really working through. This almost feels like I'm like talking about a person. Like, remember, you've got to say no to some things. You can't say yes to everything. You're going to tire yourself out. But that's really true. That's what we're working through. So there's still a lot there that's coming. Again, these are the work in progress areas. And finally, for this realization, you need to have accountable executives. And what I mean by that is you need someone that if this fails, it's not going to be good for them. If you have this ambiguous, like the team is accountable, like you do ultimately need to have leadership, like certain people that are accountable for that work. And you need to figure out that some work is going to need to be taken off their plates to do that. Yeah, I'm just smiling because we often, especially at work, we just want to do more, but we need to do less to be successful. So governance, that was great. Antonio from Studio, we had a whole talk about governance. You can check out all of their materials on our website, SDNYC.com, if you'd like to see more about that. But there's a lot of governance. Again, I'm speaking from working for a really large organization. So there's a lot that you need to work through there. Make sure that you can understand the governance structure, maybe even remodel it a little bit for what needs to change. If you have more people, these are kind of just, these are more, again, this is the ending part. So there's just some thinking here. We haven't finished how we really make service design real in the sense of launching all of our products and services using this. So make sure you have buy-in. Makes sense. Everyone needs to buy in. Always inflate your timelines, consistent socialization. So it's never, over the course of the 3 years, I never felt one day that I never had to explain what design was. Every day I explain what designers do. Every day I explain what service design is. Not like, hey, did you know what service design is? But constantly using the methods in the place of work and explaining why they're beneficial and why they're helping us move forward. So that's, I would just take that upon yourself. Whatever you're doing, that is a part of your job. I spoke with a younger designer like a couple months ago and they were like, well, that's not my job to explain to them what I do. And I was like, actually, it is. And so that's sometimes something that people need to learn is there's this consistent explanation of what you're doing. And it's like a teaching while showing and doing together. So just something to remember, it doesn't get easier there. That's not supposed to be negative. It's encouraging that you can always get to explain yourself and reinvent yourself. Celebrate each and every success. So for us, I think we've done a pretty good job along the way of well, this has helped me reflect a little bit about how much we've changed. But take the time to celebrate and celebrate your teammates and the things that you're doing, as little or as big as you want to do that. And what's the point? So the follow through today, we're still working on it. Again, we recently moved ourselves around, and we're figuring out how do we pivot and get what we want to get done, and using all of these things that we've been practicing the last years. So we're still working through it. We're steering a really big ship here, and we're happy for how far we've made it. And again, to go from a design perspective from a team of 4 to 30, to be now a part of a lot of the major decisions that they're making about how the organization runs. That's a completely different place than we were as designers 3 years ago, when they didn't even want us to talk to clients in person because, you know, what are we going to say? And now we're sitting and talking with how we should arrange people to then practice these methods, to then make the changes in the end that we want to see for our associates, for our clients, to really improve the experiences that they have with our products and our services. So that's pretty much, I'm even on time. It's because I was talking so fast. So wrapping up, I'll just close, and then I will decide whether I want to talk to you all or put you in breakout rooms just for a minute to reflect and identify, like, where are you in this? And was this all stuff you knew? Anything that changed your mind about what you could be doing? So we went through research and how to create a sustainable research process. We went through really fast some of the tools you can use to make sense of that research. We talked about workshops, how they can be targeted to a variety of different goals and objectives. It doesn't always have to be a brainstorm. Prioritization, how do you start to get everybody aligned to the same priorities? And how do you then take that to realization, to actually following through and changing a service, following through changing a set of products, changing process, which those last two, as I said, we're still working on. So I don't feel like I'm an expert in any of these, but I wanted to share my experience. So final thoughts: behavior change takes time. Service design is worth investing in. Like the change that I have seen in the last few years, the way that we're approaching problems differently, and the way that it's helped us avoid mistakes. It's helped us see a little bit more clearly in terms of what we want and should be doing. So I've seen that, partners have seen that. Like I said, we've expanded the design team, the research team. That in itself is tribute to the work that we've done to try to explain the value of a lot of these practices. Clearly, I'm passionate about research. Don't stop at a co-creation session. That became kind of my frustration in 2019, I'll be honest, was we would like get all the way to a workshop and then be like, oh, all right, we did it. And it's like, there's still 2 more steps. There's still prioritizing what we came up with in that workshop and then actually launching it. But it was like all the work to even get to a multidiscipline co-creation session and get however many people from different parts of the bank to talk was like, oh, we're done. So that was something, is like, you got to keep going from there. That's just part of it. Again, that's just from my personal perspective in this job. Prioritization is hard and political. It's something that you need to be real about and figure out the politics involved, who needs to be included in certain conversations, how you can move the needle in a strategic way. Following through does take an army. And yeah, this is all a lot of work. So one day at a time. So this is where I want to pause and do, I will do, let's see, I'll ask if anybody has a question out loud, and then I want to put you in breakout rooms just for, I'll say like 8 minutes, something random like that, just for a little bit, so you can maybe have a moment to share with some others about where you are in your process, and then we'll close out with a couple slides. But any questions allowed? So we're just gonna do a wrap up. Kathleen affinity mapped all of the questions into categories. So we're gonna do a couple categories to close out. I love that she organized them. And actually I'll pause there. Does anyone wanna say something about, and I know we're just at 7:30, so what I'll do is feel free to drop at 7:30. I'll hang on for a few more minutes. I can stay till 7:40. I'm not going to ask Kathleen or anyone else to do that. But if you want to chat more I'll go a little bit over, and I'm just saying that now. Our other event was like 20 minutes over. I don't know if anybody knew that. That was last month. But anyway, so anything from the breakout rooms, like did you have time to do anything more than just introduce yourself since they were rather large groups, or you can speak aloud if you didn't?
You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, we were able to chat just a little bit. We had just a small mini conversation.
Love that. All right. Well, thank you for having a mini conversation. This has been a very casual chat. So anyone else want to say anything about the breakout room? Did they make a new friend or get to see an old friend? At least some people are smiling.
A lot of us have theater backgrounds. That was very interesting
really?
to stumble upon. Yeah.
Well, you
Yeah,
think
I was going to say that.
backstage. Oh, sorry, Emily.
Same.
What was that, Natalie?
The front stage, backstage. I actually met someone who is a service designer who used to work for Sleep No More. And that was where they figured out what service design was. And if you haven't heard of it, it's an interactive theater. And the one like thing that strings them all together is the music. But they're doing all these different things like in the front stage and the backstage. It's a whole thing. Look up Sleep No More. But anyway, so I will answer a few more questions. Kathleen, now I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have to hop?
Are you guys seeing my screen, actually?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, apologize, the fonts are really big. My eyesight are not very good, so I keep enlarging the font.
See. You make for the audience that needs the help, and it helps everyone. Okay,
it's universal design.
Yes. They know. So I wanted to start their process and the culture silo questions I wanted to start with. And then again, like, feel free to like wave or like take yourself off mute if you have a really pressing comment to make. So around the process, how much time from Kyle do you spend sense making versus brainstorming versus facilitating and co-creation? It depends. Love an answer like that. So I would say I try to spend, I wouldn't say an equal time, I'd say probably the most time I spend is on sense making and co-creation. The brainstorming versus facilitating, that to me I kind of pair together. The research, I try not to linger too long on the research, even though that's one of my favorite parts. I try to make it really clear, like I said, to like how to get into a working session of some kind and how to like make sense of that in co-creation. So I'd probably say co-creation is the most, next sense making, then brainstorming, then research, just so we can get enough to move forward. Service design fails. Often service design fails, designers and researchers might feel that they did the right thing, but in the end users might not like the product. Sometimes leadership is forcing to abandon a good project. On how you deal with total failures. So we haven't had a chance to totally fail because we haven't fully realized our service design practice. So we have a lot of failures out there, but I wouldn't attribute them to service design because they were done without service design. But how to deal with the total failure, I think with anything to do some kind of retrospect or debrief and really break down why did it fail. And I'm trying to think of like a failure that I want to share. But I'd say getting everyone together and talking through like what were the components that made this fail and how can we avoid doing that again, kind of straightforward. And feel free to be like, that's a horrible answer, or if you want to ask more about that. But I'd say it's just like making sure you get everyone together to talk about it. For cultures and silos, curious about cutting across silos. I think we did that one with a service design mindset. How do you deal with? So that was like explaining what you do with an open mind. Thanks for joining, Chris. Most frequently found or look for SD allies. So process engineers, this is a new thing that I discovered within the last year. I love process engineers, and I think I say that too much at work and maybe it freaks out that discipline. But I look for disciplines that do something similar to me, process or researchers or like I said, any type of person that maps out a process and helps make sense of things are my best friends. Allies, let's see, when it's newer to the organization, I think people who are even familiar with design thinking or human-centered approaches, people that are interested in those things, or just like trying to find something small that you can show them this works, and then get their buy-in, so like they can learn by example. Is it better to look for allies in one silo at a time? Yeah, I'd say like there's not like a right, like only focus on the product organization or the tech organization, but I'd say like as you meet people, you'll notice in a session, or you'll notice the way that they respond to whatever you're doing that involves service design. You can tell pretty quickly whether they would be open to learning more. But I'd say multiple cohorts simultaneously. Let's see. To hear about the culture of design in a global financial, I can't speak to, we're not fully global, technically we're a national bank. Let's see, are UX and SD well accepted? So we have a really strong user experience and service design organization across Capital One. I would say just in certain pockets, folks are not as familiar with some of the things that those disciplines do. It has changed over the years. The design organization in particular, I think it was a little bit over 5 years ago, maybe 6, didn't exist within Capital One. I have to look back and see when we went through this huge like design thinking, training everyone about human-centered design work that we did. We did that back in 2014. So over 6 years ago, there wasn't even a design organization. It was less than 10 years ago, there wasn't a design organization. So that has completely changed. The future of traditional banks. I feel like there are a lot of financial folks on there that would have good answers. But I think all banks should consider service design. I'm not biased at all. But I think looking at the way that people want to access their money and understand their money is changing. And I think that banks need to consider how they're doing that, especially looking at the tech savviness of younger generations. Let's see, everyone's on board with these things. The challenge is knowing what to do next. Let's see. I'm just trying to see which ones I can answer while being respectful of time. So yeah, knowing what to do next with the insight, and that's a whole session I actually did a long time ago in January when we were in person, of how to use a map and take an insight from it and turn it into action, like basically identifying the key problem areas. Like we talk about moments that matter. Sometimes if you were to address these 3 moments that matter, you would completely revolutionize, or change, I should say, the experience for the better. So identifying, pinpointing those 3 points in the map, and then how do you have an ideation around each one of those points, and then look at constraints and how you can actually make a change there. How we tackled the challenge of mindset change, painfully, slowly, meeting them where they are. I mean, it's just patience. That's kind of like a difficult answer, I feel like, to take, but it's like teaching people every day about what you do and how it can help them was really the short answer, but not an easy one to try to implement. Research repository I kind of answered. So from that, I'm pretty much, I saw there were some questions about tools. Tools that I personally use are Sketch, InVision, Google Sheets, Mural, Murio. I like to use what can help everyone else move forward. So I will use something as like basic as Google Sheets for mappings, so that other people can contribute and they don't feel as precious about it. As soon as something is done with like a Sketch or like an Adobe Creative Suite type product and it looks too nice, people hesitate to give feedback on it. So the tools that I use are I think really basic. I know there are some questions about tools. For the future of service design, there are a lot of great talks about the future of service design, and I would look for Jesse Grimes did a great talk. He is in the global leadership team of the Service Design Network, and he does some road shows on service design trends, and you could check out our website to see if there's some materials there that you could look at. So the future of service design, I would love to come back to in another talk. Besides that, I think I got through a lot of these topic areas. Any final questions, burning questions before we close out? I know that was a lot. You even were in a breakout room briefly. There were lots of chats and things. But yeah, what do you guys, any final questions or comments before we close up this evening? Miro, this good tool. Thanks, Amy. And yeah, tools like that are great for distributed teams. Great point. Just about, yeah, Miro.com, you can check out. They're having an annual distributed conference. Highly recommend. Any other final questions? Thanks for the heart, Emily. Well, I appreciate everyone for joining. Again, this was exciting to be the first time I'm a speaker at one of these events after hosting with Kathleen and other folks who may or may not still be on the line. But yeah, just thank you everyone for joining this evening. Happy to connect on LinkedIn. If you have follow-up questions, follow us on social media. I saw Andy pop up and I thought of all the great social media channels like Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. And then check back, we'll share on our website. There will be a recording of this. There's going to be an article written as well. Is Melon still here? She's not still here, but somebody is writing an article to recap this. And then we'll share any outputs. But thank you again for joining and have a wonderful evening. Cheers. Talk to you all later.